to listen to a podcast full of wonder, excitement, and discovery. It's time for an adventure through Odyssey. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Adventures Through Odyssey podcast, Odyssey Revisited. I'm Will here with John, and today we're going to cover our next 6 episodes. So we're going to kick it off with Harley Takes the Case, parts 1 and 2. Officer Harley attempts to find a missing boy named Steve Larson.
Yes. It is... So before I listened to this, I never heard this episode. Got under the radar. I think like a lot of the Harley episodes.
Yes.
I think it's a surprisingly good episode.
Yes, they made Harley significantly more competent in this episode.
Right, and, you know, it's based on criticism. Obviously, a lot of these past episodes, we've been talking about the Harley episodes and some of his more problematic aspects, but it kind of surprised me they didn't just kind of leave this in. Like, why... I'm almost wondering, like, why cut him out to such a degree? Because you really could have left this in, because it could just seem like some competent police officer.
Well, Whit opens saying it's Harley's last case in Odyssey. I get the feeling the damage had been done, and they just decided to, wipe everything from the record. But they do have that episode where he comes back almost a year later, which we'll cover when we cover. But yeah, they remake this with Isaac and Rodney later, so we won't spend too much time. I was very surprised that they managed to eke 2 episodes out of this. I think it also just shows, like, older Odyssey was much more slowly paced, dialogue-driven, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
But a few good scenes. I kind of find the whole scene where they try to arrest the guy at the fair not amusing, but a very decently executed fake-out scene.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the ways they made it a 2. It was probably one of those things where... Because this is probably one of the first 2-parters.
It's the first 2-parter that wasn't in a Family Portraits remake.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty good. And we were talking about the 2-parter. It's that there's a little... Like, if they had really wanted to, they could have cut this down to a...
Yes.
To a 1-parter episode. But, what's here is entertaining. I think they probably thought because it was Harley's big send-off.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a hard balance to make. I do think they do a good job of sending him off, making him competent. It does seem, though, like they could have brought up more about him moving or, like, him doing something else throughout the episode. They just kind of say at the end he decides to leave.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's how it goes, but...
I almost wonder if they had written the episode and then added the pre- and post-bumpers.
I think you're right.
Where they're like, we gotta make Harley a little more competent, but then they're like, actually, it's...
not working, let's junk it.
Yeah, they're just like, this is the last episode with him.
Alright, a change of heart. Freddy Hart learns that it takes more than different surroundings to make him a different person. This is the one where the kid transfers schools. Oh, yeah.
This always felt like I always felt bad for this episode. Like, I was a pretty, I had friends in like school, but like I just always felt for this kid. Like I felt really bad that like everyone was just so mean to him.
I mean, it's Adventures in Odyssey. No, yeah, this is a thing where a visual media might help, because the way they describe the character makes him sound like he looks visibly like a dork.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. I mean, I think a lot of it's more like stuff like he likes butterflies.
Yes.
He likes this, which it's like, I mean, Binky Barnes liked butterflies. Doesn't mean the kid has to be a dork.
Freddy liked butterflies before it was cool.
Yeah.
I did think if this episode were made today, like him liking butterflies and wanting to take harp lessons would not be seen as an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, and that's not bad. I mean, it's just odd. Some of these episodes are products of their time, and something like that, right, wouldn't be... I mean, the episode itself, the episode doesn't look down on the fact that he likes using butterflies or he plays the harp. Like, it literally learns at the end to, like, play the harp. It's more that, like, right. Well, let me be fair. I think kids would still pick on a kid today, maybe due to that fact, depending on the school. Now, it's hard for me to tell how old Freddy is.
I think it said middle school.
Yeah, middle school can be rough. So I mean, it would depend on the kid. like how much he owned it or something.
I would agree.
But yeah, I think kids, it's hard because I'm thinking kids today versus kids when I was in high school, which wasn't that long ago. But I actually do think it could be very different today in terms of some of that stuff.
I mean, I'll give this example. My mom was doing a Sunday school class with some kids and asked, like, do they still pick on kids with disabilities? And the answer was no. Apparently they really hammer it in not to do that. Now, I am not saying Freddy has a disability in this episode. Please do not take it that way. But I get this strong feeling that anti-bullying is a stronger thing now even than it was back in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is stronger in schools. But I do think it could potentially be that someone, like... I do think kids could still pick on another kid for liking butterflies or playing the harp. I think it's less likely today. But I still think some of that still holds, but right. But I don't even know. I think kids get picked on more for their appearance or, like, superficial factors.
I did sort of appreciate, though, that the Odyssey Academy kids are clearly a little snobbier.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
I do feel a little bad for his parents, though, because they're probably paying money for him to go to this school. We know they're paying money for him to go to this school from a later episode. And after one day, it's just clear this is not working.
Yeah, it's a downer.
It's a downer. It is noted as the first episode not to have any of the main cast in it.
Oh, that's true.
And it had gone without being in an album for 15 years after it aired, so...
Also interesting.
So when it was re-released on the Gold album, that was the first time it had ever been re-released, which I don't know why this didn't just wind up in the Lost episodes. Like, why did this get to ascend to a normal album?
Maybe they were probably considering. I mean, the whole Gold series is, like, interesting because it's so, like, all over the place what got in what album to some extent.
Yeah. I mean, Odyssey was always a little more nebulous in the early days of the albums. Speaking of being nebulous with the albums, we're jumping all the way to album 6, The Price of Freedom. Mr. Altman teaches his class that the men who fought in Vietnam were killers. This doesn't sit well with Kurt McGinty, whose father died in the war fighting for his country.
This is such a heavy episode. Truly, I actually think maybe one of the heaviest episodes in Odyssey history.
I agree. I believe this is the first time it's mentioned Jerry's dead, right?
I think it's one of because a member of the family mentioned it.
Right.
Well, it mentioned, I don't know if it mentioned that he died in
It said war. Died in war, so I think we can all kind of piece together based on the time period.
Yeah. Him, like, dreaming of his dead father
is a bit of a heavy scene.
Like, having a teacher say they all died for nothing is, like, it's sad. It's, like, really sad and really heavy. I don't know if Odyssey would do an episode that direct today. I mean, I think there's definitely some... I mean, they're doing the new military family.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. What are their last names?
Perkins.
The Perkins. And I think that's really great. I don't... Would they do an episode where they're like, oh, war... Like people trying to argue with them that war's pointless...
Maybe. Well,
and, like, these people, like, people go to war and die for no reason.
Well, interestingly, on the wiki page, it mentions they received a lot of positive responses from this episode, with veterans writing saying, thank you for remembering our sacrifice. So, I'm not saying they would make another episode like this, because it's also apparently the most re-aired episode.
Oh.
So I get the feeling this is probably like a Veterans Day staple for a lot of Christian radio stations.
That's fair. I mean, I think it's a heavy episode. I think it's a good episode. It's just, I would be curious. It's interesting it's an interesting thing from the standpoint, because, I mean, in general, the Vietnam War gets ignored.
I think especially now, even, 50 years after the fact.
I think especially that. So it would be interesting, honestly, to have something... I mean, I guess, right. I don't know if they would necessarily do something like this for the Iraq War or Afghanistan, but I think especially in the time Vietnam makes sense to do this episode. I guess Odyssey could very well do an episode like this, and I think it'd be very good. I would just be curious. At least this heavy where it's on the kid. It's like a kid suffering his father's death, and it's a kid having this issue. I think the idea, like, with the parents, where it's like, the teacher's brother died, Whit's son died, and it's like the kind of this thing where it's like, well, maybe, their sacrifice was important. and still had some meaning to it.
Right.
I think they could do an episode like that. I don't know if they would do an episode that as solely focused on it to a kid.
I think that's possible. I do think re-listening to it, I don't want to say Whit oversteps. I maybe, if I were Whit, would have talked to his mother before going to confront the teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
I also get Whit has a little more vested interest in it because of Jerry, so...
Right, I think the idea of that is that Whit is like, you're also saying my son and a lot of people's children.
Yes.
You know, didn't have a purpose in dying, and you're like, you shouldn't be telling kids that, and you really shouldn't. You can say, yeah, I don't want to go deep into it, but like, yeah, I fully agree that I think what was to say that people died for totally nothing is like,
yes,
is a hard thing to say to a child.
Or anybody, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the episode just kind of dives right into it. Like, this was clearly the first time they had so much story, we couldn't have 5 to 10 minutes of just the characters introducing themselves to some extent.
Yeah. This could have been a 2-parter.
I actually kind of agree with that. That might have helped, not because it feels rushed, I think it would have helped the episode breathe a little more.
Yeah, and I think you could have gone into some more interesting ideas with it.
Yes. This is also notably was not put on 2 years after it aired, and they're talking about how that's highly unusual. I don't know if it's because it was so dark or because it was re-aired so much that they didn't want to put it in an album, so it felt special to the radio. Or it could just be, because so many of the early episodes didn't get put into an album immediately, this one just got passed over by mistake.
Yeah.
So, or maybe they never intended to release all the episodes on album, but when it was clear, people are buying these a lot, we should start releasing all our episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a good episode. I think the ending's really well done. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. A second part might have just let the characters breathe a little more. We could have talked more about it. And it doesn't end abruptly, but it definitely feels like, wow, this is a very on-the-nose letter that I doubt the man would have written. And I know it's a fictional show, so you don't have to tell me that in the comments.
Yeah.
All right. Rumor has it Jack Davis and Lucy Cunningham Schultz wonder about a strange family in town, and Jack is convinced they're up to something.
This is just like kind of I don't know. It's not the most memorable episode. It's enjoyable at times.
Yes. It was also it was also put on album 3, I'm assuming because album 2 was all those summer episodes, they didn't want it to.
Yeah, kind of wanted that
Right.
theme.
It is also very weird to listen in 2022, knowing the context of Odyssey now, where it would later become Kurt and Lucy, but Jack and Lucy get married.
It is funny. I mean, that was always the funny thing, because in the show, it's clearly they're kind of pairing Kurt and Lucy.
Yes.
And then, like, they're like, oh, do you remember that, like, Jack and Lucy were a thing ever? It's like, no. It's like, well, it happened later.
Yes. Right, because Jack disappears for quite a while, as I recall. I feel like he comes back after his voice drops. This is also an episode Harley was edited out of.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think it's a good episode about the dangers of rumors.
This episode goes quite a far way. I feel like any time a kid calls the police,
Yes.
that's a far step to go. Like, I mean, maybe in the 80s, 90s, kids were calling the police all the time. But to me, like, to call the police to be like, I think he's murdering someone.
Yes.
It's just like, what? Like, not even, like, in a super comedic way. Like, it's not like some kind of sitcom episode where, like, the kid's like, this is happening. This is, like, supposed to be, like, kind of dead serious, and it's about rumors and...
Yes. So I will say this. This plays like what I would imagine a small town group of kids would believe about a new family who moved into town who does some not shady, but clearly different things.
Yeah, don't say shady. It's just they're different.
Right, and it would never go this far. My only thing is, it does surprise me that Whit doesn't know more about it. And again, this is early Whit. Later Whit, it would be kind of surprising. Wait, Whit doesn't know the new people in town?
Yeah. This was when Whit was still a normal human being.
Oh, that's true.
Before he ascended to become the all-knowing Whit.
This is a good point.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. It's also the first appearance of Lucy, which I just always like to mention. Kind of one of the big Odyssey characters. And I'm just looking at this because I was curious. Oh, apparently Lucy is the longest running kid according to episode appearances.
I 100% believe that. I mean, Lucy started here and went until, like, the hiatus.
Yes.
Like, that does not surprise me at all. I would be more surprised if another character was longer.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Jimmy, but that's about it.
No, because Jimmy hasn't even appeared yet, and Jimmy moved away. I'm pretty sure Lucy was still in episodes after the Barclays left.
Right. This is in terms of number of episodes, not in terms of length on the show.
Oh.
But yeah. And I did not know the voice actors got married in 1993, so that probably means they were adults at least teenagers when they recorded this.
I think a lot of Odyssey voice actors are teenagers.
That only surprises me because Lucy sounds like a child in this episode. Jack sounds like he should be in high school or something, but...
Yeah, that's fair.
So, anyway, but... Right, I never think of Jack and Lucy as a pairing because they switched over to Kurt pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like Jack was always just kind of like, he was a likable kid.
Yes.
But I couldn't really, like, think he had the most distinct personality.
Yes.
Like, if they had come up with Kurt would be in this episode.
I would agree with that. Like, Jack later kind of becomes friends with Oscar, and although Jack becomes Mr. Overactive Imagination, he also feels a little more down-to-earth and less the one who always is getting into trouble.
Yeah.
So... But a fine episode. I like that they at least try... It is interesting they try to address something like this so early on, because you could totally see an episode like this today. Maybe a slightly more sensitive portrayal of the people, but...
Yeah, I agree.
Not that it's insensitive, but I do wonder how well that's aged.
Yeah.
All right. Last up, Honor Thy Parents. Laura Jean Fremont is embarrassed by the things her parents do. Whit then tries to help her learn what great people they really are.
I do think this is an interesting episode. It's interesting why they threw this in the Lost episodes.
Yes, why is this in the Lost episodes but a Change of Heart? I feel like this should have been an album one and not Change of Heart, but that's just me.
Yeah, I think this is, I think it's a topic that people don't always think about. I guess I'm surprised the daughter doesn't know any of this stuff.
Yes, but you could see a sixth grader maybe not knowing all this about her family, but yes.
Yeah. Why don't you talk a little about the episode?
I think it's a fine what?
I just said that so awkwardly. I was going to ask a more specific question, and I was just like, why don't you? And I totally forgot the question, so I just talk about the episode a little bit.
So I think this is a decent episode. I will say, and although I do think Laura Jean is rude to her parents, you also do kind of sit there like, they are maybe being a little more extra than you would think. Because this is she is going to Odyssey Academy, so maybe the friend is just snooty.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't say I get it. I get why a sixth grade girl might be a little embarrassed.
Right. It's hard. I mean, I feel like it's a hard balance to make. And I've been saying that a lot this episode. Either in the last 28 hours episode we talked about or in this podcast, I've been saying that a lot. But it's hard because it's like, right, she shouldn't have been so embarrassed by her parents and been so upset. But also, like, sometimes you can be embarrassed by the parents. I forget, what was the specific triggering event for the embarrassment?
So first they see her dad get yelled at by the boss.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dad walks in and the friend realizes that's her daughter. And then the mom just kind of comes in this shabby dress, acting a little country. I shouldn't say country, but like Laura refers to them as hicks.
You just offended our whole country audience, Will.
I didn't mean it that way.
No, I get, like, right, and I think it's actually interesting. I wonder if they were going to have more stuff with, like, Odyssey Academy gets brought up, but it is interesting, like, 2 very close episodes, they talk about Odyssey Academy, and there's this kind of idea that people are snooty there.
Yes.
And I wonder, it's interesting. So, in this context, it's like, right, I think it's supposed to be saying in front of these other people, like, why aren't you, like, to the same level as, like, these people at, like, the private school?
Right.
I wonder, one, is it supposed to be a private Christian school?
That's very possible.
I wonder if that's a thing. Like, in terms of, like, why they didn't talk about Odyssey Academy as this, like, separate thing.
Yes.
As much. I wonder if there was idea it was a Christian school. I wonder if, you know, soon after this or around this time was probably when more people were leaving, like, public schools to go do homeschool.
That's
and
possible.
people going to, like, more Christian private schools. So I wonder if there was a thought, like, wait a minute, should we be portraying private schools in this way, even if, like, we've seen this kind of attitude among, like, people who probably had their kids in private school have seen that. So I wonder if that's something that they kind of started to kibosh, because they're like, actually, like, we shouldn't be saying this about private schools, or, like, we shouldn't be seemingly make it, because I mean, arguably this could also happen in public schools.
Yes, I would agree. Okay, so I do just want to point out there's a goof here. This is apparently Homer Fremont uses the word gosh, contrary to what Focus on the Family and Odyssey think is moral. Does Focus on the Family not like using the word gosh?
I would think, I mean, I've known other people in school who, like, their parents did not want them to use any, like, variant of, so, like, something like gosh could be, you know, is like a non-swearing version of taking the Lord's name in vain.
Right.
And so to them, it's like even using that is bad. Like, it's someone like using the word heck.
Okay.
It's like it's this perception that that you're just kind of like putting in a replacement and what you're doing is the same. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think someone saying gosh is different than taking the Lord's name in vain, but I think other people don't do that, and I think some parents have that issue, so I think that's probably why there's a ban on it in the show.
That's probably true.
I think a lot of times you hear, like, oh goodness, maybe.
Yeah.
I think sometimes in Odyssey, but, like, yeah.
Right. And I also think this might be the last Odyssey episode that's kind of set up as Act 1, and I know this is going to sound Act 1 sets up the conflict, and Act 2 is Whit kind of explaining to the characters the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm.
It does surprise me the tiniest bit that Whit, again, does not just allow the parents to be involved, or the parents were apparently going to do nothing after all of that.
Yeah.
So.
Fair.
That could just be me. I think it's a good episode. It does say it was the first episode of the summer season, so I actually don't know why it wasn't included in album 2, other than her friend is voiced by who would eventually voice Donna, so it's possible they just didn't want that to happen.
Fair.
The confusion. So, anyway, we're going to start the summer season in our next episode. How do we feel about these kind of last 6 episodes of what I would call the Trial Odyssey arc?
I think they're overall pretty good. I think a lot of these were entertaining. I think some of them dealt with deeper theme. Like, some of them were darker or deeper, but I think a lot of them actually came out pretty well. I think, obviously, there's different things you could do, but overall, I think these episodes are pretty good.
I would agree. I think they're kind of finally finding their footing. I think with these upcoming summer episodes, they really get there. So I think with the summer season is when the show really finds its footing, and by the time Connie becomes a Christian, they've completely written it all out.
Yeah.
So we'll see you next time for the first 6 summer episodes, which I personally have a deeply nostalgic connection to, because I feel like if you were a Christian kid growing up around this time, that was those 6 episodes were basically your summer, unless you went to summer camp. I never did. But
I tried. We can talk about my attempt at summer camp.
Yes. Anyway, I'm Will.
I'm John.
We'll see you next time.